Do you believe this world we live in is three-dimensional? What if I were to tell you it's four-dimensional or more? What if I were to tell you that there's a book that will explain that whole business to you, written by a very extraordinary author who also wrote a very extraordinary book about women, the Daughters of Ishtar? My name is Vinny Dacquino. Our next guest is Don Wurtzman. Don, let's talk writing. Don, we've been together a long time. We work together in writing groups. We've been in book signings together. You never cease to fascinate me. Tell me a little bit about who Don Wurtzman really is. Tell me what you did before you concentrated as much as you do on your writing.
Well, I was an engineer for most of my career, and in fact, I was not a writer. I didn't like writing. I hardly ever read also, other than technical things. But what happened about 15 years ago or so, I retired. And I read something which said that people are most afraid of dying and being forgotten. And in fact, in this survey, they were more afraid of being forgotten. And I was thinking at that, what do I know about my grandparents or my great-grandparents? And the conclusion I came to, I know nothing about them.
Wow.
I know both my grandmothers died before I was born, and my grandfather, I knew their name, but I really didn't know what they were thinking or, anything about them. And even my father, I really never spoke to him about what he feels, what he thinks. Probably then I wasn't interested.
Well, it wasn't common also at that time, Fathers were fathers, sons were sons.
Yeah. And so then I said, what about my grandchildren? Are they going to know, what are they going to know about me? And I started to think about that, and I said, well, about that time, websites became popular. And I was able to get a website. I was reasonably technically savvy. And I started putting on a website all my thoughts. I figured I would have a website with all my thoughts, and this would be something that anybody in the world could see.
Your legacy.
Yeah, everybody could see this. And but I noticed I used to write in the morning, and I would go to the bookstore, like a Barnes & Noble. I'd go to the Barnes & Noble in the afternoon, have a latte. That's big for me, and read stuff. So when I started writing this, I came to the point where I was mostly writing about physics. I'm interested in science.
Well, that's your field, right?
Yeah, I'm interested in science. I'm interested in theology too, but I was mostly writing about physics. And I said, well, maybe I'll just I had other stuff in it also. Maybe I'll just concentrate on physics. And so I started to concentrate on physics, and finally got to a point where I said, I can make a book out of this. I have so much. Have so much stuff. And about that same time, all these print-on-demand companies started coming out. I don't know if people are familiar with print-on-demand, but in print-on-demand, like if you buy one of my books, they print it just for you. So they don't have a whole bunch of copies on a shelf somewhere. They just print each individual copy for the person who orders.
Which is a very interesting concept, because for years, writers depended on these traditional publishers who said, no, not my thing. And many of these writers never got published.
Yeah.
So this was an opportunity to get your book out there.
Yeah, and you had to get, if you do that way, they have to print 500,000 or some large number.
There's money,
they got to print a lot of money. This way they just print, one at a time. And so these things became possible. And so I started aiming towards one of those publishers, and that was my first book, The Gyroverse, that I did that with, and I published it in 2002, I think, the first time, and then I added to the theory. This is like a theory which is a work in progress, so this is not something that I'm finished with.
Right.
I'll be finished when I die. I mean, before that, I'm not going to be finished.
And maybe not then either.
And maybe not then either. Okay. And then 2004, it was published again. And then 3-4 years ago, on CreateSpace, I published it again. But each time I added a lot of material.
Right.
To
and that's the beauty of this thing. You know, with traditional publishers, you get it out there, and what you get out is what you get out.
Right.
This time you can go back, you make changes, publish it again.
Right. The first 2 times with that publisher, once I got it out, I couldn't touch it anymore, even though it was print on demand. But this last one, CreateSpace, a company that's owned by Amazon, you put your book on there, and then you could take it down and put another version of,
yeah.
And no one even knows about that. It has the same cover, maybe the same number of pages.
Now, I was fascinated with Daughters of Ishtar. This wonderful story. I'll let you tell it, but when your grandchildren, you wanted them to read the book, but there were some spicy parts in it that you wanted to avoid, so you published a kid's version of the same book?
That's right. That's right. I called it Daughters of Ishtar 2, and well, my son said to me, could his daughter read? His daughter was about 10 at the time, 10 or 11. And I said, no, a lot of X material in that book, so she can't read it. So my wife said, well, why don't you take it out? Take that material out. I said, well, I don't want to do that because...
change the story.
Yeah, maybe it'll be okay for me, but the characters won't like it. So I didn't want to do that. But then I was at a meeting in where Amazon spoke or CreateSpace spoke, and they said, you can have more than one book. You don't need one copy. You can have different things.
Wow.
And so I said, okay, I'll try to make a copy without the X material in it. So I took 1,800 words out of the book, and that was for my granddaughter. Now, the problem I had, which is, it's not an end to that story because her other grandmother, who lives closer to her, looked at the book and said, well, she doesn't still think it's appropriate.
Oh, no.
So she didn't read it, but I still have the book, and anybody can buy that book. And I've even taken some more material.
Does that have a different ISBN number, too?
Yes, different.
Wow. So it's a different book.
And if you go to Amazon, you'll see both books.
Wow.
So, and that's something you could do with this that you can't do. I mean,
with a traditional publisher,
they will not let you do something like that.
I mean, there were so many things. I mean, I was so frustrated. Some of the books that I've put out recently are books that I've written years ago, and I couldn't get traditional publishers to bite. And it was so frustrating because really, you're writing books for thousands of people, and 2 or 3 people are deciding whether that's going to happen or not.
Right.
And if you can't get by those 2 or 3 people, those thousands of people will never read your book.
That's right.
So that made me nuts, and it just didn't seem right to me. So I love the idea of self-publishing. And self-publishing has come a long way from what it was. There's people out there with bestsellers on the self-publishing list.
In fact, I think that's going to get bigger and bigger as the other stuff gets smaller.
Because the internet, you know, years ago, you didn't have that internet to sell your work. Now, people like Justin Bieber, who go on the internet, are seen by people who never would have seen him any other way. Kid's a multimillionaire.
Yeah.
So you could get on some of these sites, even having a website. And it's as you say, that lasts forever. Not only your grandchildren, but their children can read about you and see you. And those things will be on there long after we're both gone.
That's right.
So very interesting. So how frustrating is it to get the book ready? I mean, I know, and I say this affectionately. I laughed how many times you would change the thing. I'm sending another copy in. I'm sending another copy in. I said, Dad, how many times? How many times versions? I know they give you the proof. How many proofs did you send them?
You know, I really don't even know the answer to that because I don't change anything. So I have no way of knowing unless I kept
So you don't keep all those changes?
Oh, no, I have all the changes.
Yeah.
I'm up to every time I make a change, I add something, I will make it a different copy. Like I'm up to copy 140.
Oh my God.
So So in my records,
And these are different versions of the same book.
Of the same book.
With just changes.
Changes, right. And so when I put some changes, in fact, the last change I put in the gyroverse was just a month ago. I had maybe 4 sections that I've worked on. And in that book, it's not the writing that's the harder part. It's
the
technical stuff that takes, all the time. And like I say, I still do it. So a month ago, I took it down and I put it up. But I must have done it easily a dozen times.
Yeah. See, some writers will tell you that writing is frustrating. Because, for example, Ray Bradbury, when someone said to Ray Bradbury, how do you know your book is ready for the publisher? He said, when I can read this book from the front cover to the back without making any changes, you would be here for... That book would never make it to the publisher.
Well, not only that, right in the back of the books, I have a little blurb telling you about the book. Every time I read that, I can make changes on that
Even
too.
the blurb.
Even a little thing that big. So it's very difficult.
Yeah, and again, that's the big difference between traditional publishers and self-publishing. With self-publishing, you can do it. Now, the other amazing thing about those are that some of those don't charge. So you could go in, and it doesn't cost you a penny to send out a whole new version. All you have to do is download the interior of the book, and then you download the cover, front and back, and they take it and they print it.
Right.
So if you change the interior, they don't care. Then you send them the new interior. If you have to, you change the ISBN. Do you have to change the ISBN every time you make a change?
No. It's the same ISBN.
Yeah. But don't they freeze the sales of the book while it's transitioning?
And, I keep on sending them notes, but they ignore me. And I tell them they should have make before break. In other words, you should get, when you finish the new one and they accept the new one, then is when they should break and stop selling the old one.
But they stop selling it? No, the minute you say you're going to change it,
they stop it.
They stop it.
And it only takes me, let's say, a day or two to get back on.
Yeah.
So it isn't a long time. But,
but it is a break in the sales.
Now, on that particular book, it's on the gyroverse, it's a little more complex because I have an index in that book. So you have to have, an index adds another complexity to the book. I, of course, have a table of contents in the book. I have like 3 dozen illustrations in the book.
Wow.
So I did all those illustrations.
No, you do it. So you actually did all the layout for this book.
I did all the layout.
See,
even the cover, I did the cover.
Yeah, that's a major difference between the traditional publisher. Traditional publisher will say, send us the pictures, we'll do the layout. We'll tell you how it's going to lay out. In your book, you do all of that.
I did that. But they will do that. In other words, for money, they will do some of those things for you.
So the prices change. If you want them to do the cover, a little more money.
Yeah,
if you want them to do the blurbs, a little more money.
Yeah, but once you pay for that, then you're done with it. If you change it, if you make changes to the inside, you don't pay them any more money for the outside.
Right. All right. So okay.
So it's a one time for that.
But the inside, you make changes there. It doesn't cost you anything more.
I just make a change.
You can make the changes whenever you want. But the paid things kind of have to stay the way they are.
Unless you want to pay them more money.
To change it again.
Change it again.
So you can't just do what you've been doing, and that's just kind of changing it, make changes, say here's a new interior.
Right. I learned how to do that. And
now, what about feedback? Do you get feedback from your book? Is anybody reading it out there?
There are some people reading it, but you tend to get very little feedback.
Yeah. Well, gyroverse is such a specific, and that's a closed audience.
Physicists is sort of like a religion.
Yeah, yeah.
All science is like a religion, and it's very, very. You try to propose something different.
Yeah, you have to find your target audience, and it's a very small target.
Yeah. So
what about Daughters of Ishtar? Daughters of Ishtar, I have to tell you, I love that book. I've enjoyed reading it. I went through a lot of those changes that you've made in it.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about what Daughters of Ishtar is about.
Okay, let me just back up a little bit. There was somebody, Merlin Stone, wrote a book, When God Was a Woman. And in this story, she points out that if you go back to the figurines, the prehistoric figurines that they find, are always women. And the reason they're women is because they thought gods were women. They weren't even aware of how birth happens. So they didn't know the male contribution to birth. In fact, you know, it's surprising there are actually some tribes in Africa that recently, up until recently, didn't know
that's what caused pregnancy.
Yeah.
Wow.
So when you imagine it, you know, a long time ago, people didn't know. So they thought that, you know, women had children, and so the gods had children, and maybe we were descendants from them, and so the gods were women. Then what happened is, as men got more important in terms of having wars, the goddesses had a consort, a male consort, and she had a male consort. Then later on, the male consort became the major god. In other words, the man became the major god, and the woman became sort of the consort.
Leave it to the men to take over, right?
And then the Jews came along, and then they just wrote women out of the god business. There's no more, because they only have Yahweh, who's the only God. So I got the idea that, let's suppose somebody tried to bring back this woman dominance. How would they go about doing something like this? And so for this, I have this tribe, the Ishtartes, 4,500 years ago, where they lived, and that was a female-dominated society, and they were overrun by male societies that were close by. But a cult remained, and this cult said they were going to bring back their civilization when they can, and they passed the mantle to new recruits for all these years. At different times they tried to do something, and I do describe one thing in the book is during Mary Magdalene was a daughter in the book, and I talk about how you know, why she was and what happened there. And then they finally, with the new technology, they finally came to a point where the technology was such that they thought they can actually do what they had planned. And this is a story about what they planned to do.
What the daughters of Ishtar planned to do now, to kind of take over civilization.
To take over.
The women were going to take over the world.
That's right. And this is how they were going to do it. And then there was a protagonist, Kirby, and a woman who was looking into this, and they found out about it, and they tried to countermand it, and this tells what they actually did.
So the daughters of Ishtar were now modern, and so it was more today.
Right.
And they were planning to do what they had planned to do hundreds of years ago.
Right, 4,500 years ago.
Right. And now the idea of the book was to thwart their efforts.
Their plan, right.
Right. And so the book is all about how they were able to stop it. Now,
also what they were going to do, you know.
Yeah.
It's interesting what they were planning to do.
Yeah, I remember.
I mean, after all, these are just a few women who were going to change humanity. So they had to have I wanted to have a feasible plan, and it's a plausible plan.
Yeah, it is a plausible plan.
And how they would do this, and then how these protagonists found out, and how they.
So let me ask you something. This is fiction, so there was no research involved, right?
Oh, well, there's a lot of research.
A lot of research.
A lot of research.
So even though it's fiction, tell us a little bit about the research that you had to do to get this book.
Well, I did most of a lot of research I did in the bookstores, because the thing I like about a bookstore, even better than a library, is that the bookstore, you can speak in the bookstore.
Yeah.
You don't have to be quiet.
You're a regular groupie of the bookstore.
Right. Yeah. And we have a group. You
can
talk,
yeah.
And so that's and they have the latest books there. Yeah. You know, that's what they sell, the latest books.
And now these days, bookstores have coffee, and and you can sit around and talk.
Right. I didn't write. I mean, the Gyroverse I've been writing now for 15 years.
Oh wow.
So, and the other book, the Daughters, 5 or 6 years. So I didn't write fast. I was not a fast writer. So as I would read things, I would say, hey, this could be in the book. I mean, I could use this, you know. And that would be one thing. The other thing, internet. The internet is wonderful. I mean,
yeah.
with
Oh, yeah. The things
internet,
you can do. There's so much information on there.
yeah, you know, like they're in Israel and getting dinner. Well, how do you get dinner in Israel? I don't know what the dinners in Israel are going to be, but there are restaurants in Israel, and they advertise on the internet. You know, they're on the internet.
So you're able to check the menus out?
You check the menus out, and
Wow.
so you can do
Interesting.
all sorts
Very
of things that.
You also do something else that blows my mind as a writer. I remember you're reading a chapter at the writers group, and I'd say to you, Don, which chapter is that? And you say, I don't know, it's one of them. And I said, what do you mean one of them? Is it, I mean, where? He said, I don't know, I'm not sure where this chapter goes. I mean, you sometimes write chapters out of order?
Oh yeah. Generally, I would go pretty much. When I first started the book, The Daughters of Ishtar, there are two ways people write: character-driven, which I think most people are, and plot-driven. And I was plot-driven. So I had the plot down, and I have now about 79 chapters in there. But I had 20, 30 at that time, and I had maybe 2 or 3 sentences on each chapter, and in order, and that's where I started. But when you start writing, you start saying, you know, I should have said something about this. You know,
So you go back and you write about this.
You write about that, and then where does this go? Well, I'm not really sure where it goes, you know, but
But it had to be there.
But it had to be there.
And I'll put it there when it gets
Yeah,
there. That used to make me nuts.
yeah.
I used to go, how could you do that? I mean, when I write a book, I write chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
You don't. You
Yeah.
do 1,
Well,
2, 3, maybe back to 1, maybe chapter 8.
Or I would read something, and I'd say, hey, this is a real good chapter in the book. And I'd be interested in it, so I start writing right then, and not knowing exactly where it's
Where
going
it's
to
going to go, you just know it. It's going to fit in somewhere down the line.
And then also you go through the book, and you balance it. You say, well, I have too much of this over here and too little over there.
Yeah.
So what can I move? Some things can be moved almost anywhere. Some things can be moved within limits. And a thing that I did was something that James Patterson did, and I got it from him. All my chapters are small. They're like one theme in the one scene or one theme or a little story in the big story.
But they can almost stand alone.
They can stand alone, right? So you can move them to a lot of different places. Not anywhere, but there are lots of places you can move it, and that's what I did.
When you're done, you know, you've heard me say this 1,000 times. Never write the first page first. You always write the first page last, because by the time you get done with the book, you don't know where this book was going to go, especially yours.
Yeah.
Good God, especially yours, because yours go all over the place. So when you're finally done and you say done, that's when you have to go back to page 1 to see what you've done. And you go crazy when you do that, because you go through and you make changes and changes and changes and changes.
Yeah.
So when do you know when you're done?
You know, it's a tough thing. You don't have, when you do like through CreateSpace, you don't have editors.
Right,
Like
right.
you don't have the.
It's hard.
The publisher editors. In the Daughters, I have a friend, and after I had the book out, the book was already out, and he looked at it and he read it and he says, "A good book, but you mind if I do some editing of the book?" I said, "Hey, be my guest."
Yeah.
So he took chapter by chapter, and he found like 6 things per page.
Wow.
6 per page that he questioned.
Wow.
And I fixed them.
You fixed them all.
I fixed them.
I know. I made comments to
then
you, and I
make
was
a new-
shocked to see
and
how
then
fast.
I just take down what I have and I put up the new thing. So even that book, even The Daughters,
He did the same thing.
got changed.
Made changes along the way.
And I still occasionally, I don't do it often, but occasionally, you know, if somebody mentions something, and I say, hey, that should be in the book.
So when you get a proof copy back, you know, the way they work is they send you a proof copy, and they give you some time to read it, and then they say, okay, well, are you ready? And if you say okay, and you sign off on it, then they make the actual copy and start distributing those copies
Right.
to different bookstores and wherever.
Yeah, they don't ask you, actually, you know, there are steps.
Right.
And now they made it actually even better, because now when they give you a copy to do it, you can do it online, and the page is actually
Yeah, and you can see
turned,
every
so you
page.
see every page. And I go through the pages, to make sure that everything looks right. And when you're happy, whenever that is, you just say
Yeah,
yes.
and they don't say, you have 7 days to do
No,
this.
no, you don't.
I remember when I did Kiss Kenny Days Goodbye, my son had pneumonia. I was in the hospital by his bedside. I slept at the hospital. And they sent me the proofs. They said, you have 7 days. Get this done. But the kid was in the bed, and I was sitting there making changes and trying to get it to them. You don't have that pressure.
No.
You don't have that pressure.
Whenever you're ready, you do it. Now, I try not to wait a lot of time, because the time I'm waiting, the book is not being sold.
Right.
So I have an incentive to get it done.
Right.
But they don't push me on that.
All right.
Whenever,
Don, we can get your books online. We've given your website so you could do that. Are they e-books?
yes, they're all e-books. They were put on Kindle. No, I put them on Kindle.
Okay,
And
so that they're there.
They're there. So if you go to Amazon, it'll give you the book and the Kindle book,
and you can do it.
and you could do either way. You can
All
get
right.
the book.
Any final words for our audience? What do you tell those writers out there?
Well, one thing is that I was not a writer, and I became a writer. So you can write if you really want
To be a writer,
to be a
right.
Right. Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what your background is. If your heart is there and you really want to write, you can.
Yeah. And the hardest thing to do is start.
Yep.
The hardest thing. And the second hardest thing is to finish.
Do you have a set time that you sit at the computer?
Usually in the morning, an hour or two, but I don't really have it. It's not religious with me.
Okay. So here's the bottom line for our audience. You want to write? Write. Talkers talk. Writers write. And that's what you have to do. If you really want to write, go write. Find the right time. Find the right place. Read some good books, such as these. Don, what a pleasure to have you here,
Well,
buddy.
thank you for having me.
Good to have you. You are an example of what people can do if their dream is to be a writer. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being with us today. Read Don's books and stay well.